Valentina was in a hurry to get home. She had literally gone out for half an hour to buy medicine for her young son Cora. She waited in line for a long time while the pharmacist sold all the necessary medications to an elderly lady. Finally, Valentina was able to buy the needed medicine and rushed home. Besides her 10-month-old son Cora, she had 2 other children. She was considered a mother of many children and received a certain amount of financial support from the state, but it still wasn't enough. Her eldest son, Anthony, and Gabriel, who had just turned 9, were taking care of the kids at home. The young boy behaved bravely and helped his mother as much as he could. He changed diapers, fed his younger brother, put him to sleep, and sang lullabies to him. In addition to all her tasks, Valentina had to go to her work shift. She worked as a nurse at a local hospital. Her whole family depended on her. Her husband, Apollo, had passed away 3 months ago. He was hit by a car while crossing the street. Valentina was devastated. She was left alone with 3 children. But soon she pulled herself together and continued living. She didn't usually leave the children with the neighbors, who were mostly alcoholics or shady people who only asked for money to drink or complained about their worthless lives. Valentina tried to talk to them, explaining that she also had many problems, but these marginalized personalities didn't even realize how much they were sinking. These were the types of people Valentina had to live with in her neighborhood. However, she got used to them and taught her children to stay away from them. Valentina didn't realize she was trying to cross the street at the wrong place. At one point, she almost met the same fate as her husband, but at the last moment, someone grabbed the sleeve of her coat. She turned around and saw an elderly woman in tattered and torn clothes. It was obvious she was homeless. She appeared out of nowhere and literally pulled Valentina back onto the sidewalk at the last moment. A bit more, and the young mother would have been hit by a car. Just then, a car whizzed by at high speed. The driver didn't even think about slowing down, even though he knew perfectly well he was in the city and not on a high-speed highway. Valentina, feeling guilty, lowered her head. The woman who saved her looked to be around 60 years old. The stranger adjusted her scarf and looked at Valentina with a concerned expression. "Oh, why are you walking so fast, dear? Are you in such a hurry to reach the other world?" she asked as she approached. Looking at her, blushing with surprise and perhaps shame for her reckless intent, Valentina replied in a low voice, "And no, I was just running home to take the medicine to my son. My youngest son got sick, and I have 3 children in total. There's no one to take care of them properly, only my eldest son helps, and he's only 9 years old." The woman nodded and offered Valentina a seat on the bench near the bus stop for a few minutes. Unlike most homeless people, she was different from all of them, and Valentina noticed she seemed to take good care of herself. Her nails were clean, and her teeth were intact. It seemed she had become homeless by accident. The woman expressed sympathy for Valentina's difficult family situation and offered help. "Dear, maybe I can help you." "Are you serious?" Valentina asked, frowning. "Of course I am. I love children," she replied with a smile on her face. By the way, my name is Esther. I'm pleased to meet you." "Nice to meet you too." Then the old woman said, "Don't judge me by my poor clothes, it's a story apart. I'll tell you one day. And don't be afraid of me, I won't steal anything from you or harm your children." However, Valentina still had reasonable doubts about this woman, as she had never seen her before and didn't know what she was really about. Valentina was perplexed and didn't know whether to accept Esther's offer or refuse it. A stranger stood before her, but at the same time, the elderly woman's eyes radiated only kindness. Valentina saw possibilities in them, as if someone closer and dearer were looking at her. Thoughts passed through her mind. What if she agreed? Wouldn't there be some kind of catch? At the same time, Valentina was in a desperate situation. There really was no one to take care of her children. Not even her friend could help. She called her once and asked her to watch the kids, but she replied that she had a date with a man. After weighing the pros and cons, Valentina agreed to Esther's proposal, as she had no other choice. She needed to work that day. 20 minutes later, they arrived at Valentina's tidy apartment, which showed the owner's dedication. Esther looked around and said, "It's a cozy and warm place." "We did our best," Valentina said. "Come in, let's have some tea." The children came out of the room when they heard noise in the hallway. They immediately began to ask, "Who are you?" "Hi, Grandma." Tears welled up in Esther's eyes. She took a handkerchief from her pocket and wiped her face. Seeing her agitation, Valentina jokingly responded to the children, "Yes, this is Grandma, but only for an hour." The children didn't understand what for an hour meant, but the most important thing was that they heard the word "a grandma." They immediately smiled and began to hug the elderly woman. She almost cried again in surprise, but managed to hold back. Then little Cora took his medicine and soon felt a bit better. Valentina checked his temperature just as a precaution, and it was nothing critical. After offering tea to Esther, Valentina began to prepare for work and gave some instructions. If Cora's temperature rises again, give him syrup to reduce the fever. "Okay, I understand. Don't worry about anything," Esther said. "I'll do everything as necessary." "All the medicines are on the shelf in the cabinet," Valentina continued to explain and pointed to the glass-fronted cabinets. "If you want to eat something, there's soup and meat with pasta in the fridge. There's also formula on the kitchen table. Anthony and Gabriel know, they'll show you everything." "I didn't come here for the food," Esther tried to reassure her. "You can go to work and not worry about anything." Valentina agreed, but in her thoughts she said, "How can I not worry? They're my children." However, Valentina's intuition told her there was no reason to worry, and she believed that Esther was incapable of harming anyone. With this in mind, Valentina went to work with confidence, knowing that everything would be fine at home. As she walked to the hospital, worrisome thoughts about her difficult life after her husband's death persisted in her mind. Valentina had trouble asking for help. Among her acquaintances, there were no people who could provide significant support. She often found herself in dead-end situations and had to find a solution on her own. Valentina couldn't even imagine what would happen if she gave up. Probably, life's problems would crush her, and her children would be sent to an orphanage. However, Valentina managed to avoid all this, largely thanks to her late husband, Apollo, who, despite being an orphan, knew how to find a way out of any situation. She remembered how they urgently needed to pay for their eldest son's treatment. Valentina called all her acquaintances but couldn't gather the necessary amount. Her husband then made a deal with the neighbor to help him finish his summer house. In the end, Apollo earned money for the medications, going above and beyond for the sake of their son. Valentina recalled this now, when she needed to think about who would take care of the children. She put aside her principles and worries, as her parents had long since become alcoholics. There was no point in expecting help from them. But even in the past, when they still led sober lives, her mother taught her right away, "You got married, which means you've grown up. So manage on your own and don't bother us." How could she expect any help after that? With these heavy thoughts, Valentina hurried to work. But no matter how fast she walked, she still arrived late. In the reception room, Dr. Dominique greeted her with a cold look. "It's a shame. Where were you? If this happens again, I'll fire you or cut your bonuses." Valentina almost cried in response. "I'm sorry, Doctor Dominique. It won't happen again," she said, almost bowing at his feet. Valentina ran to her locker. Her colleague Luna, who had started working there only a few months before, was already changing clothes. Seeing Valentina panting, Luna asked with a smile, "Hey, why are you breathing so heavily? Was someone chasing you or something?" Valentina shook her head and said, "I was running to work, hoping to be on time, but ended up being late." "Like hawks, Doctor." Dominique was in the reception room and scolded me, threatening to fire me if I was late again. That's life," Luna said sadly. Listen, I always forget to ask, Who do you leave the kids with when you go to work? Usually with Anthony and Gabriel, my oldest son, Valentina replied. But recently, a woman has been helping me. I met her by chance on the street. She looked like a beggar but saved me from death. I was about to cross the street at an improper place, where I often run, and almost got hit by a car, said Valentina. What a gift from fate. And after that, you invited her to your home. Yes, well, we agreed she would take care of the children tonight. Esther seemed like an honest woman. I didn't see her documents, but she appears to be about 76 years old. I don't believe people are capable of anything bad at that age. A naive thing, Aluna shook her head negatively. You're really leaving your kids with just anyone. She's probably already robbed your apartment and the kids are running around hungry, calling for their mother. No, she won't do that, Valentina shook her head negatively. Okay, as you wish. Let's get to work, otherwise Dr. Dominique really will fire us all. In principle, they had nothing to fear in terms of dismissal, as being a nursing assistant at the hospital required all their strength and nerves. They didn't earn much from it, and there were many people in the city who wanted to care for sick people. But there wasn't much choice, so they had to work where at least they could receive a regular salary. Luna started mopping the floors in the corridor. Valentina went to the rooms to turn over bedridden patients and change the basins. She kept thinking about her children. Her colleagues' doubts about Esther stuck in her mind like a splinter. Valentina began to worry that something might really have happened to them. At some point, she even suspected her friend might be right. Her intuition told her that her thoughts were senseless, that she was just getting carried away, creating more emotional problems. Without noticing someone's abandoned slippers near one of the beds, she almost tripped over them. She managed to keep her balance, but the basin fell loudly to the floor. The elderly lady lying in the nearby bed grumbled and called for the doctor. After a few minutes, Dr. Dominique arrived and asked what had happened. Control your nursing assistant, she won't let me rest, the elderly lady grumbled. What happened? The doctor asked sternly. I simply didn't see someone's slippers and almost fell. The basin slipped from my hands, causing noise throughout the room, as she tried to explain. Okay, I'm giving you a warning. Keep working, the doctor said, shaking his finger and leaving the room. The incident was over, but Valentina felt a bitter taste in her mouth. She was reprimanded for merely doing her job correctly. Once again, Valentina realized that being a nursing assistant was a thankless job. As she left the room, she leaned against the wall and cried softly. Luna was mopping the floor when she saw Valentina in that state. What happened? Who hurt you? As usual, I got caught in the crossfire, Valentina replied between tears and told her colleague what had happened in the room. They have no conscience. They could at least say thank you, Luna shook her head. On the other hand, at their age, that's quite expected and some aren't even happy to have lived so long. You're right, Valentina agreed, feeling a bit calmer. Sometimes I imagine myself old, and it almost makes me feel sorry for them. It's really hard for them, and we simply can't understand them. The conversation about the incident in the room ended when Dr. Dominique appeared and stared at them intently. Luna moved on to mop the floor and Valentina continued her rounds. The doctor sympathized with Valentina and even tried to court her, saying he had children and a wife and dreamed of having Valentina as his mistress. Valentina knew this and rejected his advances in every possible way. She had no intention of becoming such a woman or getting involved with an unstable, most importantly married man. It was hard to expect anything good from him. Docteur. Dominique was irritated because he couldn't understand why Valentina resisted him. He offered his love and gifts, promising to make her a queen. I'll do everything for you, he would say when they were alone. No thank you. I'd rather be alone than with you, as she would shake her head in refusal. Saying this only encouraged the man, but she couldn't even think of getting involved with a married man. After finishing her rounds, she joined Luna, and together they quickly cleaned all the rooms. Then they returned to their work. I advise you not to pay attention to Dr. Dominique, said Luna, turning on the coffee maker. If you're referring to his threats, I've already forgotten about them. Valentina waved her hand. Let's eat some more gingerbread cookies. They're still not stale. Doing her job slowly, Valentina didn't even notice that the end of the shift was approaching. She looked at the clock and murmured to herself, another workday has passed. Did you say something? Docteur. Dominique unexpectedly approached her from behind. Yes, I'm happy that everything is in order with the patients, Valentina replied confidently, without hesitation. Of course, they're under my observation, the man said proudly. Valentina said nothing, only nodded her head. She barely had the strength to keep from laughing. It seemed he was trying to prove to everyone that he was the best doctor. Waiting for the end of the shift, Valentina quickly changed clothes and ran home. Why am I running? She was worried about how the children had spent the day. She hoped that if Anthony and Gabriel hadn't called her, then everything was fine. As she entered the apartment, she smelled pancakes. The children immediately came out of their rooms. They were clean and tidy. It seemed the visitor had already fed and bathed them. Valentina was shocked to see Esther. You're a real magician, Esther. Anthony Gabriel was holding little Cora in his arms and said proudly, Mom, he's feeling better. He doesn't have a fever anymore. Valentina placed her hand on his forehead and was surprised to find it wasn't warm anymore. I made an herbal compress for him. The syrup helped, but traditional medicine is even better, the elderly woman replied. I don't even know what to say, Valentina said, confused. I thought I would find a mess and dirt, is that what you meant? Esther asked. Well, I'm not entirely like that, but something similar, Valentina commented. But now looking around, I can't believe what I see. Don't be surprised. I promised everything would be fine, Esther said, lowering her head. Sit at the table and try it. The children have already eaten, but if they want more, there's enough for everyone. Valentina couldn't hold back her tears and hugged Esther. You're my guardian angel. These words deeply touched Esther's soul. After calming down, the women sat at the table to have tea with pancakes. They were so delicious that Valentina didn't even notice how she ate 5 in a matter of minutes. After satisfying her hunger, she cautiously asked, Sorry for asking, but how did you end up in this situation? You know, Valentina, I don't really have much to tell, Esther replied. I can barely remember anything. I woke up in some ditch without documents or money. That was 6 months ago. There was a wound on my head. I could barely get up. How horrible. And there was no one around. Valentina asked, putting her hands on her face in compassion. Why? Esther shrugged. Some homeless people found me and took me to their shack. They gave me clothes because mine were in bad shape. Who knows how long I had to stay in that ditch. So that's what they gave me. There wasn't really another choice. I don't even remember how it all happened. Did you try going to the police? Valentina continued asking. Are you kidding? Esther replied with a snort. I went there, explained my situation, and they didn't even take my statement. I didn't understand the reason, but they said they stopped protecting people here. Valentina was surprised. There was a local policeman who told me I was disturbing the service of decent people. Tell me, Valentina, am I a person unworthy of respect? The elderly woman burst into tears, and Valentina handed her a handkerchief. No, that's not true. You're a good person, as she reassured Esther. You just happened to meet a heartless policeman. Maybe that's why you didn't get any help. The woman shook her head. I'm so sorry for you. You were just a victim of circumstances. And as for the police, they're always a rusty cog in the mechanism. Deep down, Valentina felt not only sympathy but also indignation that no one had helped Esther. The woman had lost her memory and was adrift in the world. After thinking for a bit, Valentina suggested, "Stay with us. We have enough space, and the children, from what I understand, are happy to have you here." "Are you sure about this?" Esther asked. "I'm truly grateful to you." "Then please continue taking care of the children," Valentina stated firmly. "I work shifts as a hospital aide, and unfortunately, my kids are often left alone." "Okay, I understand and agree, especially since I have nowhere else to go," Esther replied. Esther's face lit up with a happy smile, as now she could live in humane conditions and no longer waste time searching for food. After agreeing on what to do and when, Valentina continued working calmly at the hospital. Docteur. Dominique still tried to get close to her, but Valentina wanted nothing to do with him and avoided him whenever possible. One day, Luna asked Valentina, "So, how is your homeless resident? Has she stolen anything else from the apartments?" "My God, where do you get these thoughts from?" Valentina replied, irritated. "We're getting along very well. I've never met anyone who could help like she does." "And nothing surprising, there are people like that everywhere," Luna said, shrugging. "Well, name one person who has helped you," Valentina suggested. Luna hesitated in her response. "See, it's unlikely anyone would do that unless there was a direct benefit," Valentina said. "You know, my friend, you're right. I apologize for teasing you about that woman. Her name is Esther, and she's also like a mother to me," Valentina corrected. "Let's stop discussing this poor woman's life. Life has already knocked her to the ground. Let's not gossip about her anymore." Okay. I'll be quiet." Excellent. "Let's work," Valentina said, patting Luna's shoulder, and they went to fulfill their tasks. This conversation was the last about Esther. Thus, Luna no longer tried to pick on Esther. On the contrary, she became interested in Esther's health and what she was doing. It seemed that Valentina's colleague also showed sympathy for her, especially after Valentina shared that Esther had lost her memory. Luna even passed things through Valentina to her guest. Luna's mother had passed away 6 months ago, leaving behind many clothes. Luna hadn't had the heart to throw them away, but this was a chance to give them to someone in need. Valentina thanked Luna and invited Esther for tea and cake. The elderly woman knew how to cook deliciously, even though she didn't remember where these skills came from. 3 weeks had passed since Esther had appeared in Valentina's apartment. During this time, Esther had completely adapted to normal life. The children had also gotten used to her and, strangely enough, called her grandmother. They thought she had gone away for a while and had now returned. Moreover, Valentina didn't think of dispelling their illusions; they lived like a family. Meanwhile, Valentina couldn't get Esther's memory loss out of her mind. It was unbelievable that she had no relatives. Someone had to be looking for this woman. However, Valentina didn't know who or where exactly, but she hoped to get information soon. She reached out to volunteers with a request to find Esther's relatives. She briefly explained what had happened and provided photos from her phone when she had taken pictures of Esther. The volunteers promised to help. They started the search and kept in touch with Valentina. However, there wasn't much to share. In the places where homeless people usually went, no one knew Esther. They showed the photos to them, but the homeless people only repeated the same phrase, "We don't know anything." They either didn't remember her or simply didn't want to get involved, fearing they would be taken by the police, as many of them already had problems with the law. For instance, the lack of documents didn't bother the homeless, but law enforcement officers could take a serious interest in this, which is why the homeless didn't want to have contact. Meanwhile, the search continued, and the volunteers promised to do everything possible. Meanwhile, Valentina tried to find her using social media and other online resources. Esther watched her actions and only lamented. I don't believe anything will come of this. If I had loving relatives, they would have appeared somehow during the search, Esther said. I'll still try to find them, if you don't mind, Valentina insisted. Of course, I'm totally in favor of this, but I'm sorry to bother you, Esther said with a smile. Get rid of those dark thoughts, Valentina ordered. You're not bothering anyone. Look how happy the kids were when you showed up. It's just a fairy tale, there's no reality to it. Valentina continued her search, which soon became known at work. While Luna supported her, all the other employees joined in, and some even made gestures at their temples, saying, "You're crazy helping some random person. She's just an ordinary woman with life struggles." Valentina tried to convince them. You don't understand any of this, so don't judge if you don't want to be judged. Overall, almost everyone on the team, except Luna, believed that Esther was just trying to deceive them. But Valentina wasn't the type to give up in the face of difficulties. She believed she could find Esther's relatives. At the same time, Dr. Dominique's advances led Valentina to a nervous breakdown. She didn't have time for love games, but he just wouldn't stop. Then one day, she responded to him rudely. Why don't you just leave for good? I already have a bunch of problems, and you're still bothering me. What's wrong with you? You have a wife, so go bother her. The doctor was furious. At that moment, employees started gathering in the hallway, drawn by the noise. They decided to find out what was happening, almost surprised to witness a heated argument between the doctor and the aide. What are you doing here? Don't you have work to do? Docteur. Dominique yelled at them. You should yell louder so the patients can hear you, Valentina replied sarcastically. You don't work here anymore, doctor. Dominique concluded. I'm firing you. Pack your things and leave. Whatever, as you want. The employees were shocked and began whispering among themselves. They hadn't expected this attitude. Everyone expected the head doctor to calm down and for things to resolve peacefully, but no, he went all out and fired Valentina. She received her pay and left the hospital without saying goodbye. She went to say goodbye to Luna, who was shocked to hear what had happened since she was in another department at the time. If he did that, it's okay. I'll get through it, Valentina said. I'll find another job, maybe try some private clinics. Don't worry, I won't disappear. I've been through worse. A life doesn't stop. I love your optimism, Luna said, surprised. Sometimes even I surprise myself, Valentina smiled. And not long ago when Apollo died, I didn't even know how to keep going. It felt like the whole world had ended, everything had turned upside down. You can't imagine what it's like to be alone with 3 kids in your arms. Well, it's okay. The most important thing is not to lose heart. Valentina winked and left the hospital building. She was no longer tied to that place. Of course, it was a pity that her work experience was cut short, but on the other hand, Valentina had a lot of problems that needed urgent attention. Recently, the volunteers informed her that they had found a lead. They gave Valentina the address of a supposed son of Esther. However, Israel lived 100 kilometers away, in a neighboring city. Valentina wondered why he hadn't managed to find his mother. Well, we don't know. It happened that we met him, the volunteer explained. It turns out we also collaborate with animal shelters. So, Israel went there to ask what to do with his cat. She missed her owner and wouldn't bond with anyone else. I don't understand what the cat has to do with this, Valentina asked. The cat belonged to Esther, Gabriel from the shelter continued. Israel shared his problems with one of the staff. That's how we found out he was Esther's son. Here's Israel's address. Go and give him the good news. We didn't do it because we thought you would give him a surprise. This will indeed be a surprise, Valentina agreed. Thank you, I owe you. We were interested in participating in the search ourselves, the volunteer said. Valentina took the piece of paper with Esther's son's address. She hadn't told anyone yet. She needed to be sure he was really her son before finding out more about the shelter and the cat. Valentina suspected that Israel might have disposed of his mother on his own. If he could likely get rid of a cat, it wouldn't be hard for him to do the same with a person. However, speculating didn't help. She soon arrived at the address. It was a 3-story house that looked like a palace. Valentina had never seen such beauty before. Shivering as if it were cold outside, Valentina approached the door and rang the bell. After a few minutes, footsteps were heard, and a man in his 30s appeared at the door. He looked at Valentina and then nodded, as if asking who she was and what she wanted. For a few seconds, Valentina was at a loss, but then she took out some photos from her bag. The owner was shocked to see the photo. "Oh, where did you get this? And where is my mother?" His hands were trembling. She's fine. She's with me," Valentina replied. But I'm interested in knowing how Esther ended up in another city. Let's talk inside." Israel invited her in. Valentina entered and was even more surprised. The beauty outside was just the tip of the iceberg, the real luxury was inside the house. There were antique furniture and paintings, marble tiles on the floor. Noticing the guest's confusion, he said cautiously, "This is all that's left from my father. He was an antiques dealer." "I see," Valentina nodded. "I thought you were the one who bought everything." "And no, I'm just an ordinary middle-class businessman," he explained. "My father did what he loved, while I'm in business." "Everything is impressive, of course," Valentina changed the subject. "But I simply can't understand how your mother disappeared." "It happened 6 months ago," Israel began his story. "I bought a ticket to the sea for my mother. She wanted to go for a long time, but shortly after she left, she disappeared. The phone went silent, and I didn't know what to do." "Did you try to look for her?" Valentina asked. Of course, I traveled all over the city, but with no result," Israel said. "It's strange that, with your resources, you couldn't find your mother," Valentina commented thoughtfully. "I understand," Israel repeated. "Then get ready, we're going to where your mother is. Maybe she'll remember something," Valentina suggested. What's wrong with her memory?" Maybe she has amnesia from a blow." "I don't know," Valentina said. Oh my God. "We're going to her right now, but I need 1 more minute to call Olivia and let her know I'm leaving," Israel said, preparing. "Olivia? Who is she, if it's not a secret?" Valentina asked. Well, she's kind of my fiancée," Israel replied, uncertain. "Kind of your fiancé?" Valentina asked. Well, we can't marry yet," Israel answered, frustrated. First my mother disappeared, then other problems. So I decided there would be no wedding until my mother was found." "You could have already married, especially considering how much time has passed." Let's stop talking about my fiancé now. What's important to me right now is seeing my mother," Israel replied. An hour later, they arrived in Valentina's hometown. As they approached her apartment, Valentina asked softly, "Are you ready?" "Yes," Israel answered. Valentina opened the door. A few seconds later, Esther appeared in the hallway. "Mom, you're alive!" Israel shouted. "Valentina, is this my son?" Esther asked, confused and starting to cry. "Yes, it is him," Valentina replied. "It can't be." "My dear son, I don't believe it," Esther continued crying. "It's me, Mom." "Israel, your own son," he extended his arms. Esther did not pull away and hugged him as well. Valentina had expected the reunion to be more modest, given that her guest had memory problems. However, everything happened differently. Esther broke into tears, recognizing her son, and at that moment, she said out loud, Exactly. I remembered. It's your fiancé who is to blame. I don't understand. In what way? Israel asked, surprised. I don't feel well. Esther nodded and began to lean on Israel and Valentina. After catching her breath, Esther looked at everyone with tearful eyes and said, It was a mistake, son, to get involved with her. I knew something bad would happen. The stress of the meeting with her son affected Esther, and gradually she began to remember the events of that unhappy day. Indeed, Esther was going to the sea. She wanted to relax on the warm sands and sunbathe under the sun. Israel bought a ticket and reserved a good hotel, just a few minutes from the sea. He thought he was giving his mother a gift. However, the cause of all their problems was the relentless fiancé. It was she who approached acquaintances to get rid of Esther. They not only hit her on the head from behind but also mentioned Olivia. Leave Olivia alone. Don't interfere in her and Israel's lives, Esther said. Are you serious? Israel asked, horrified. Yes. As strange as it may seem, it was your Olivia who wanted to get rid of me, the elderly woman continued talking about how she was against their relationship. Esther saw through Olivia and therefore, insisted that they sign a prenuptial agreement. Israel was skeptical at the time about the usefulness of such formalities, but his mother convinced him it would be better, and in the end he agreed. But the fiancé categorically refused. And then his mother went to the sea and disappeared. I knew your relationship wouldn't end well, Esther concluded.
I'm sorry, Mom, for godet sake, Israël criait.
I was blind as a kitten, I didn't notice anything around me. Later, Israel called his friends and asked them to get information from his fiancée about what she had tried against his mother. Under pressure, she confessed everything and revealed her accomplices. They were soon arrested. During the investigation, they confessed that everything was planned by Olivia. She was the one who convinced them to keep an eye on Esther at the nearest station. When Esther got off at the station to get some fresh air at night, they chose the right moment, but someone scared them away. Generally, they left Esther in a ditch, took her money and documents, and fled, covering their tracks so that if something happened, the case would be investigated in another city. However, they informed Olivia that the job was done and received money from her. Israel was shocked when he found out everything. Esther soon fully recovered her memory and knew that her son had been looking for her all this time. Half a year passed, and Israel began a relationship with Valentina, especially since his mother approved, and soon he proposed to her. The woman was over the moon with happiness. She started to cry and said with sadness and joy, "Until the end of our days, I accept becoming your wife." Even the pigeons took flight and circled above them to the sound of her voice. It was a good sign indicating that two loving hearts had found each other. Esther became the true grandmother to the children. She approached Valentina and Israel and blessed their marriage. A month later, Valentina and the children began preparing to move into Israel's house. However, in her hometown, Valentina had a debt to settle. Israel was surprised when Valentina asked him to take her to the hospital where she had been fired. They easily found Dr. Dominique, who was making his rounds among the patients. Without hesitation, she began to tell him everything she thought about him and what he deserved. His wife was at the hospital this time. The poor doctor. Dominique sought a place to hide from his enraged wife but still had to endure many of her criticisms. After all this confrontation, he lost all desire to flirt with others. Finally, all matters were resolved, and Valentina and her children left the city for a new life. Thank you very much for watching. Please comment, like the video, and subscribe to our channel. See you next time.